Landlord-friendly states throughout the country are facing more and more restrictions, more and more tenant protections, and less rights for property owners. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have a couple of interesting articles for you today, and it's going over an interesting topic, okay? So I've mentioned many times before, a lot of the stuff that you're seeing on the coasts in the big cities, a lot of the tenant rights stuff like rent control, eviction protections, etc., they are spreading throughout the rest of the country, okay? They're spreading to the Midwest where I live, they're spreading to the South, places that are traditionally landlord-friendly, and places where we didn't have to deal with this stuff before. And a lot of it was, it was started by the eviction moratorium, okay? The eviction moratorium took place all throughout the country, and now tenants, they're pushing for more laws, rules, and regulations that would really punish landlords and let them live for free and not have to abide by any sort of rules whatsoever. But, that's the way it looks like it's going right now. Now, before I get into these two articles, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below, and let me know if you have seen, if you are in a place that has been more landlord friendly in the past, if you've seen a lot more of these, new rules, regulations, and laws being put into place that are anti-landlord and very tenant friendly. I know I have, okay? And it's only going to get worse going into the future, okay? And there's no stopping it. And we have to really, really fight hard right now, because otherwise our property rights are going to be trampled upon, and we're going to be pushing towards, my least favorite thing, and that's socialism, all right? So the first article I have for you today, and it's coming from KiowaCountyPress.net, and it says, families face winter evictions across Nebraska. Now, this article is coming from my home state. I live in Omaha, Nebraska, okay? And I can definitely, dive into a lot of the things here in this article because it's personal for me. Now, the second article I have also, it's in another place where I invest and where I'm from. So it's coming out of the Kansas City area. And so, I decided to make the two articles I'm going over today dealing in the areas that I not only know well, but I also invest in. So let's get into this first article and see what it says. Since the Center for Disease Control and Prevention's eviction moratorium expired in August, eviction court filings in Nebraska are on the rise, even in parts of the state where evictions had historically been non-existent or rare. Aaron Feichtinger, butchered that name, Director of Policy and Advocacy for the Omaha-based group Together, said most people now facing homelessness lost jobs during the pandemic through no fault of their own. Close to 70% of the people applying for emergency rental assistance are female heads of household with families, said Feichtinger. And we also know that evictions are disproportionately impacting communities of color. And I want to pause right there, okay? So, this guy, he immediately, obviously he's a tenant advocate, so he's used to making a lot of BS excuses for people. So he immediately starts talking about the people facing homelessness lost jobs during the pandemic. Now, I told you before, I'm from Nebraska, so this article, it smells of BS, okay? So the first thing that you should know is that Nebraska was one of the first states to immediately reopen as much as possible, get the economy rolling again, after the initial pandemic, slowdowns, okay? They never had a statewide stay-at-home order put into place, and now Nebraska has one of the strongest employment markets in the country. How strong, you might be asking? Well, I have a third article, and this one will really go into just how good the employment market is. And I'm just going to read a little bit from this article to give you a idea of what it's about. And it's coming from ABC 8, and it says, economists, business leaders, Nebraska's 2021 economy stable. Nebraska had the lowest state unemployment rate in the U.S. in November at 1.8% and one of the nation's best labor participation rates. Okay, and that's all I'm going to read, because I'm just trying to get the point across that this tenant advocate who is supposedly, working for the rights of these tenants who lost their jobs during the pandemic is really just making excuses, okay? I could go everywhere, all over the city, right? There, almost every business you see has help wanted signs up, and I'm not talking about low paying crappy jobs. There are jobs, on signs, on billboards that are paying $20-30 an hour starting for unskilled labor because they can't find people. There's a McDonald's like less than a mile from my house, and it's starting people at $15 an hour. They fought for $15 minimum wage for a long time. Well, guess what? It's here, and it didn't need the government to support it. All it needed was labor shortage and a pandemic. Okay, so when you tell me that tenants, they're still struggling, still unable to get work here in Nebraska, it's BS. It's not true. Oh my goodness. And that's part of what frustrates me so much about what these tenant advocates are saying, because what they're saying is they're making excuses for people, and then they're blaming the landlords as though it is our fault. And when the other party said here is that evictions disproportionately are impacting communities of color. Well, guess what, right? A lot of the small landlords, the small mom and pop landlords, they are people of color. So when they're not getting paid their rent, it is also impacting people of color when they don't get their rent paid. Okay? So keep that in mind. I know a lot of people don't believe it, but it's true. She said, while families in rural parts of the state are being forced out of their homes, entire neighborhoods that faced historic disinvestment and redlining are seeing the highest eviction rates. And okay, they're talking about the highest eviction rates in areas that faced historical redlining. Well, guess what, right? If you're talking about where the lowest income people live, yes, they happen to be living in these areas where the housing values are super low, and unfortunately what that means is you're going to have higher eviction rates in that area. Okay, and that's just a fact, and that's a fact throughout the entire country. It's not because of any discriminatory practices. Why do I know this? Because guess where I invest? Okay, these are areas where you have a rougher tenant base. You have people who are much more lower income, and sometimes you're renting to single moms who are trying to support children, and they face more financial hardships because of the status that they're in. They don't have a 2-person household to help pay that rent. So yeah, I mean, don't think that it has anything to do with race. Advocates for property owners have argued that landlords need paying tenants because banks still demand monthly mortgage checks. Yeah, well, that's not the only thing we have to pay, and this is the kind of idiocy that I hear from these advocates all the time, that we just demand our monthly mortgage checks, and that's the real reason we're doing all this, okay? The truth of the matter is that we have to pay our taxes, our property taxes, right? Which Nebraska has some of the highest state property taxes in the entire country. Okay, up there with the East Coast areas. Okay, we still have to pay our insurance. We still have to pay utilities in many cases. Okay, we still have to pay for maintenance, and those things are not even included in the mortgage. Okay, I still have to pay my property manager whether I get a rent check or not. Okay, now in the case of the single family homes that I own, I manage those myself, so I don't pay a property manager. But in the case of my duplexes that I own out of state, I do pay a property manager. And so when you add all these things up, it is not cheap, it is not easy, and if you are a small property owner like me, who only owns a few properties, well, it can bankrupt you if you don't have good enough emergency reserves. And even if you do have good enough emergency reserves, enough problems all at the same time and several months of a tenant not paying rent are enough to just crush you. Oh, man. But I get frustrated with advocates like this. So let's go ahead and get into the next article, which has to do with Kansas City, the other area where I am also an investor. And this article is coming from the kansasreflector.com, and it says, Kansas City residents will soon have the right to an attorney in eviction proceedings. And let's see what it says. A stack of boxes sitting in attorney Gina Chiala's garage reminds her of how devastating evictions can be on families. A woman had called her in 2014, a couple years before Chiala co-founded the Heartland Center for Jobs and Freedom nonprofit law group to provide legal support for to the movement of fast food workers fighting for a living wage. She was evicted from her house, Chiala said of the fast food worker and movement participant. She didn't have anywhere to go put her stuff, and then she never was able to regain her footing in a way where she came back and got it. It was a struggle she'd heard over and over from the fast food workers who were struggling for a living wage. Being focused on consumer and employment law, Chiala didn't know how to help them navigate eviction proceedings. And so low-income people are always going to be facing more of the eviction process because, they're living on the wire. They're just very low income. Now, this doesn't mean that the landlords are breaking the law or trying to be mean or rude or anything to these people. It just is what it is based on their income. It is going to be a lot more difficult for them. Now, my problem is when they start hiring or giving free attorneys, and when they say free attorneys, keep in mind, this stuff isn't free. Okay, the taxpayers are paying for this. So the taxpayers, the people who actually pay taxes, are paying so that these tenants can fight an eviction case that they probably weren't going to win. If you owe a landlord money, you just need to pay that money or you need to go. That's the simple truth, okay? So what these lawyers do is they go into court, they file all these ridiculous motions, they extend the whole process out, and landlords can lose thousands of dollars in rent on top of what they are already owed because these lawyers drug the whole process out longer, okay? And now, in this case here in particular, it is happening in Kansas City, Missouri, right? I invest in Jackson County, Missouri, and Independence, Missouri, which is a city that is literally right next to Kansas City, okay, in the same county. So it wouldn't surprise me one bit. In fact, I think they even share a housing authority, and they might even share an eviction court. So I could, this could definitely impact me. The fact that these tenants are now, going to be able to get these taxpayer-funded lawyers, and I'm not happy about it. Okay, so I see all these new laws, all these new rules, all these regulations, all these advocates out here talking about how evil landlords are. Okay, and I'm just a small guy. I'm not one of these big players that are out here, but even the big players, they deserve, to have their property rights. They deserve to make money. I mean, that's the only reason that we're putting all of our money into these properties in the first place is because we wanted to make money, just like any other business owner. We're just business owners, and we shouldn't get these, we shouldn't get basically portrayed as bad people just because we're trying to make money. So yeah, I'm just curious if anyone else has seen a lot of these new, tenant protections and all these new rules, laws, and regulations in all these other states. But keep in mind, this stuff is moving. Both Missouri and Nebraska are traditionally known as being landlord-friendly places, and look what's happening in both of them.